There we are. We are live. My name is Ken Masson. I'm the founding president of the Rotary Club of World Disability Advocacy. And we have a really interesting conversation with a really interesting gentleman this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are. Jeremy is a charter member of the club, which means you've been with us for 5 years. Yeah.
Yes.
And Jeremy, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I am from Indianapolis, Indiana, and both grew up here and went on to Purdue University and a career in hospitality and tourism management. That then led to, during a long commute home, a bad car accident and acquired disabilities. And 20 years later, I am the founder and CEO of my own business, Walking Spirit, which provides accessible hospitality consulting really to any organization that works with the public in any way.
Okay, very good. And why don't we start right in? Because let's talk about what we're talking about today. So today, we're talking about the fact that many countries come up with disability laws. Obviously, the United States with the ADA, that kind of a law that's supposed to protect the rights of individuals with disabilities. And many well-intended countries, they create these laws, and then they're never implemented. So, Jeremy, what are you? An ADA coordinator? Is that the right title?
No, I don't have the ADA coordinator certification. I am an ADA trainer. I am a member of the ADA National Networks Trainer Leadership Network through the Great Lakes ADA Center.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So basically, somebody comes to you if they see that the law is not being complied with. Is that what happens, or you advise them on what to do?
That happens frequently. More often than not, it is me being out in the community and seeing something that poses a risk, and then speaking with general managers, operations managers, those folks, or hearing from other people with disabilities in the community who are running into issues of people just simply not understanding, not being cognitively aware of people with disabilities or socially aware of people with disabilities, and not taking the intentional steps to make certain that people with disabilities can access our community. So more often than not, I am following up on those kinds of stories to reach out to business owners and other organizations to talk about the need for training and offer that.
Okay, so tell me how you got yourself into this. What motivated you to get into this role?
Thanks. Well, and actually, before I answer that question, I should have started when you asked me to talk a little bit about myself with a description. And so, for anybody who is listening but not necessarily able to see, I am a white male with, sadly at this point, cinnamon and sugar hair that's looking more like the sugar than it used to look like the cinnamon. And a goatee, wearing a purple polo shirt that has the Walking Spirit full business logo, including a multicolored phoenix on the logo on the shirt. What motivated me really to get into anything related to the disability world, which is a world that we all actually live in, was that car accident. and waking up from that car accident as a bilateral above knee amputee. So both of my legs had been amputated due to severe burns. On top of that, over the next several years, I also developed some hidden disabilities like type 2 diabetes and severe sleep apnea. Not to mention dealing with the trauma that comes from that. Physical trauma also includes mental and emotional, and dealing with PTSD and other aspects of that as well. So it was really trying to navigate a world with acquired disabilities that made me realize how much I had ignored. And it always, I always feel ashamed to say that, but even managing hotels, I looked at laws like the ADA as something that told me how many accessible parking spots I needed to have, or how many accessible hotel rooms I needed to have, without even really understanding what that meant, because there was no such emphasis on that within the industry. And so, trying to navigate that world, our developed, lived world, um, I began to recognize how much we were actually honestly causing additional trauma, and through frustration and feeling just completely ignored. The way that we were treating people with disabilities by stepping up to a line that was defined by
Mhm.
law, but not even considering going across it to do the right thing for everybody, including ourselves.
Mhm. And and then you get the government to implement a beautiful law like the ADA.
Yes.
And then you have other countries. The ones that come to mind to me are India and Kenya, and there's many more. I think South Africa has some laws, and other countries. There's got to be lots of them. And they implement these beautiful laws. Part of the problem then starts that people don't even know what's in that law. I mean, that's where you
Right.
come in at some point. The individual with disabilities is not even educated what's being
Right.
discriminated against and not being discriminated against.
Right.
For example, how many people know that a company needs to give you accommodations when you go in for a job interview? Probably a lot of people don't realize.
Right. And even people who do know that companies are supposed to give them accommodations are afraid of being discriminated against for
Mhm.
requesting those accommodations, even though they're
Yeah,
required by law.
right. Well, I mean, the most obvious one that comes to mind is somebody who is deaf and needs an interpreter.
Uh-huh.
And oftentimes, I think what they do is bring I'm guessing, but I think from what I heard, often they bring a family member or something to do their own interpretation. But that company is required to provide an interpreter for them.
Right. And a professional
Yeah,
interpreter at that.
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. And you're right. Part of it is fear. Part of it is unknowledgeable of the law, and the other part is fear. So we need a lot of work in that area. So let's get into this a little bit. So, what do you think of is the biggest barrier preventing full implementation of disability rights laws?
so I I will always land that the biggest barrier is public. And when I say public education, I don't just mean within the public schools. I mean education of the general public, whether we're talking about business owners, or we're talking about employees, or we're talking about the consumers that come into our operations looking for our products and our services. It's educating everybody about a lot of things. And one of the first things we start off with, I think, is the fact that everybody at some point, unless they have led a completely isolated life, is going to encounter some form of disability. And even that isolation itself could lead to some form of disability.
Yeah, and part of it also is, you know, not to put anything in a category because I hate
Yeah.
doing that. Okay, so there are some companies that are really, really, really good, and they really support it. They really believe it. But there are other companies that would rather it not even be there.
Yes.
So what can we do to get those companies to think in the right direction?
Well, so there is a lot of misunderstanding. Um, Again, going back to that fear when we talk about companies and operationally, they're afraid of the cost. They're afraid of additional liability. They're afraid of things that when you actually look at what hiring people with disabilities and making your operation accessible to people with disabilities, that the reality is it actually lowers costs in the long run. Um, it actually lowers risk in the long run because you have less hazards that are there, less obstacles, um, and and really it is changing that script where and that belief system that says that people with disabilities are going to cost us more, or that people with disabilities are going to, whether we're talking about time, whether we're talking about financial resources, whether we're whatever we're talking about, where it, that we have to dispel those myths that make people put those obstacles that don't need to be there in the way.
Okay, so it's often probably the advocates that got those laws on the books, and some open-minded politicians who believed that it was the right thing to do. Well, we want to talk here about now what that advocate or advocates or anybody who's an advocate who sees injustice.
Yeah.
Um, they need to speak up, right? They need to speak up about it, and speak
Yes.
up to
And
who? To who? Who are they going to speak
to
up to?
who? To who is the big question. And that is, it's important for us to know our history. And it's important for us to recognize that anybody at any point can be an advocate. But yes, you need to be able to be speaking to the people who are able to affect that change. And so even the process of getting a law through the legislative process and signed by a governor, a president, head of state, um, that even that process, once you have that law in the books, things don't change immediately. And it takes continued advocacy to push for implementation and to make certain that that implementation is done in the most effective way.
Hmm. And you've gone into establishments. Let's look at the hotel business because that's your business. And you found them not accessible.
Yes. And I
And
found
what
them.
did you do? What did you do? What did you do in that situation?
Well, and when we say finding them not accessible, um, these are places that think they are accessible because a
Mm,
designer said your room is ADA compliant or your hotel is
mm,
ADA compliant when the doors were opened.
mhm,
But then staff didn't receive certain training. Um, Buildings age and settle, things change, and the folks who need to be inspecting that accessibility and making certain that that accessibility is always maintained
mhm,
tend to miss it. So one of the first things that I do whenever I encounter an obstacle is make certain that I take pictures of it,
mhm,
and then take that to, again, like I said, the person who should be able to affect that change. So if I go to the front desk, I'll talk with the front desk clerk, but I know that who I really need to talk to is the head of engineering, the head of housekeeping, whoever's in charge of risk management for the property. So that could be multiple people. It could be the general manager themselves.
mhm.
Um, And then if I don't see a change, going beyond that to their corporate level, and it does take a quite a bit of temerity and actually, you know, when you make that first call and you get somebody who says, I can send you to customer service to log your complaint, explaining, no, I'm not calling to complain. I'm calling to help you prevent risk by talking to somebody who can make those decisions.
Okay.
So don't send me to your 800 customer service number to the call center. I need to speak with somebody at director level, vice president level, someone who has the authority to follow up on that change.
Okay. And part of the business that you have, your Walking Spirits, is to talk to organizations because I would imagine there are a number of organizations that don't get it, now in the sense that they don't understand that the disability business is a big number of people, not only people who with disabilities, but the people that are related to the people with disabilities, their friends. It's big. So
Yeah.
it makes good business sense to try to market your business towards this business. And I think a lot of times uh, they haven't maybe an attitude that look, I'm a nice guy because I put this ramp in here for you, but don't really understand that I'm sorry if you hear the dogs in the background there, but they don't understand that it's more than just being a nice person. It's being a good business person.
It's that. It's also being proactive for your own ability to access your community as things change throughout your own life. And it's recognizing that we don't just stay stagnant. But yeah, it's doing what is really the right thing. And a lot of places think, well, we're ADA again because the designer said, we're ADA compliant, but they don't apply that in a way that's practical, or they only look to a certain extent and they don't look deeper, or they're ready to point the finger. And one of the experiences that I had, again, going back to that hotel world, but staying at a property in Chicago, of all places, busy streets, busy hotel, their parking lot was across the street and it didn't have any access from the parking lot to the sidewalk. So a person would have to go out where the cars were coming into the parking lot itself and cross the busy street to get to an accessible sidewalk on the other side. And again, because nobody paid attention to that level of it, the sidewalks, once you got to the other side of the street, they didn't actually connect up with where the entrances to the hotel were. And so you still had to go back out into the street to get to the entrance. That took months of phone calls and pictures and emails. And then when they finally did it and they created a curb cut from the parking lot to the street, they again did not connect the sidewalk to where the curb cut was, and they were still sending you out into the street just a little bit closer to where the crosswalk was,
Mm,
and still putting
okay.
people at risk. And they chose to point the finger at the county because the building and the property were actually owned by the county and leased by the hotel. And
Mm-hmm.
so it took me having to educate them about the fact that the business that was leasing the space was just as responsible for the accessibility as the owner.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I know you're most familiar with the ADA.
Yes,
That's your baby basically. Um, so, but maybe we can talk in general. At least the ADA maybe is where you're. So it covers people with physical disabilities. What about neurodiverse disabilities? Is that covered in there?
absolutely. And that would be covered through programmatic access. And that's looking to make certain that all the aspects of a program that you're offering are going to be accessible to folks. Um, including maybe having captioning that isn't necessarily just for people who are deaf or have a hearing impairment, but it's also that captioning is there for people who have cognitive impairments and need to be able to read the captioning because they're not necessarily receiving the words in the
Mhm.
same way.
Dyslexic. They can be dyslexic in that case.
Sure.
And like also sometimes a person who's autistic
Hmm.
may they be put in a situation that's overly stimulating for them. That they need a quiet area. Maybe the lights are too bright. Is that also covered under at least the ADA?
Yeah, and that would be those would all be aspects that if somebody requests an accommodation, the person providing that program needs to be able to provide. But even going, like you said, going beyond the law aspect of it to this is what allows more people to receive our information, to access our products. So it could be, yes, for somebody with autism, providing some noise canceling headphones that allows them to focus. For somebody who has those disabilities that are impacted by bright lights, by loud noises, offering or even just by crowds, offering a sensory room that allows somebody to step outside of that crowded room and go someplace where they can center themselves is an absolutely something that is an accommodation that should be offered.
Okay. And does the ADA, at least again, because that's what you're most familiar with, um, require that the companies provide training to employees to better understand disabilities, different disabilities, or is that
That
just
should
common
absolutely,
sense? That is it
that's
in
just,
ADA?
I would say that's common sense. But I mean, from a, within the aspect of the ADA, providing that training is going to help you avoid any ADA related complaints
Mm-hmm.
or even going beyond the ADA, just simply providing that training is going to help you make certain that customers and employees do not feel discriminated against.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to help you make certain, I mean, all of it leads to better service. And honestly, you were asking about what the reasons are. Yes, it's the right reason, but it's also from a business standpoint leads to better profitability. It
Mm-hmm.
leads to lower turnover costs. It leads
Mm-hmm.
to um, all being accessible beyond the requirement of the law leads to actual an actual sense of belonging among the broader public that's interacting with you.
Mm-hmm. And things like I'm thinking of like epilepsy. If you have a seizure and your fellow employees don't understand the seizure, they may misreact to it, and they may complain about it. But if
Right.
your employees are trained on it, understand about seizures, they would better deal with the situation, and that person would feel more part of the team.
Right. And part of that is understanding that not every seizure looks like what you have seen on
Mm-hmm.
TV or
Yep.
in a movie.
Yep.
Um, and yes, it is that awareness of, and you don't have to be an expert, you don't have to name, oh, they're having a grand mal seizure. You don't have to be
Mm-hmm.
able to name what is taking place, but simply being aware of the fact that there may be a disability at play that you were never even aware of,
Mm-hmm.
that this person who you work with every day might
Mm-hmm.
be living with, that when it does come into play, that you were able to provide support instead of, as you said, going to your boss and filing a complaint against somebody who was experiencing something that they didn't have the support that they needed to be able to control in that moment.
Right. And you're right. I mean, I've worked with individuals whose seizures were just suddenly they looked like they were just not there.
Right.
They were zoned out. So and you may think, oh, they're being rude. No,
They're
they're
not
having a
listening to
seizure.
me. They're ignoring me. They
Yeah,
just looked right through me.
yeah, exactly.
Mate,
So the um, the other issue we're talking about advocates who want to make a change, who want to make sure that the laws are implemented. It sounds to me, based on what you tell me, it can be a long process to get
yes.
what okay, and that then adds the advocate needs to be persistent, correct?
And yes, and this is why I always encourage somebody, regardless of what the law is, I always encourage somebody to start off by trying to educate, again, whoever that is, whoever the person is that should be in a position of responsibility to be able to impact the change that needs to take place. And that could be letting somebody know, hey, it's snowing really heavily outside, and your plow has come through and plowed all the parking spaces, and they plowed all the snow into your only two accessible parking spaces. You need to
Mm-hmm,
have somebody go out there with a snow shovel and address it. um,
mm-hmm,
it could be as simple as that. The process of going through filing a complaint, I mean, and I can really only speak to in the United States, but I would assume that with red tape being what red tape is, that it doesn't matter what country we're talking about, that the process of getting the law to follow its responsibility does take a lot of tenacity, takes a lot of documentation, and it takes a lot of follow up. And it also takes a lot of patience, because you may be given 30 days to reply, whereas that business that you're trying to hold accountable or trying to make a change somehow manages to find ways to make that a lot more than the timeline that you were given.
and the other issue too is that you may be fighting against a corporation that has deep pockets and have lawyers
Bigger
that are going to.
resources.
So and so, what am I going to do as an advocate to fight against those bigger resources? Do I have any resources I can use?
Well, at least in the United States, there are protection and advocacy services that are should be in every state. Um, there are independent living centers that also are required in every state, and vocational rehabilitation services. There is an infrastructure there that is intended to support advocacy, and especially within that independent living philosophy, their whole purpose is advocacy, 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 and then
Mm-hmm.
to provide independent living services to people with disabilities, and
Okay.
helping folks understand how to advocate for themselves is one of those first things. Now, if you're finding that you're not getting anywhere with educating the person at the property level who should be able to make change, and you're not getting anywhere with educating somebody at a corporate level who should be able to make change, or even being able to get a hold of them, then you also have your representative, your legislators, you have your attorney general's office and their consumer affairs division.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but a lot of the time, you're doing everything you can to try to get somebody to believe in you.
Breaking up a little, Jeremy.
We went
So
black for a second. I'm
there you go. You're back. You're back.
okay.
Um,
Yeah. So
yeah. So I like that word tenacity. I've use it often. Yeah. I mean, it's a good word when it comes to advocacy. Uh, you have to really believe what you're doing, regardless of what you run up against. That what they're doing is wrong,
yes.
and that what you're doing is right. And you're not only doing it for maybe yourself, but you're doing it for thousands of other people. You know,
And
also.
and that is a huge piece that even if you think that you're the only one that something matters to, maybe it's every time you go to the movie theater, there's only one accessible restroom in that movie theater, even though you have 12 theaters that are full of people. Um, it is questioning those things. And sometimes when you question that, you find out that, oh, the legislation actually says that an accessible door just needs to be operable with 5 pounds of pressure or less
Mhm.
and doesn't require an automatic button, even though you thought every building does. And
Mhm.
so it's understanding that. And then where there is a difference, where there is a conflict with that, it's reaching out to those places that can help you understand and help you maybe make that change.
Mhm.
But realizing that making the change because it was something that affected you is going to make an impact for the next person with a wheelchair who comes into that movie theater, or who goes into, or the next person with autism who goes into that shop or goes to attend that class.
Mhm. Okay. So we've talked about the individual advocates here now, but there are disability organizations all over the world. God bless them.
Yes.
Um, and what role do they really play in implementing these laws?
I think they play a tremendous role, um, especially in that, uh, in the work that goes on behind the scenes that sometimes we're not even aware of. That those organizations should be the ones that, when they call a senator's office or a representative's office, um, or even a corporate office, that they're the fact that they have the support of their organization behind them should get them further beyond the front door, versus the people. And those organizations should be huge in organizing the general public to make certain that that advocacy is happening not just behind the scenes but also in public, where it is, becoming not just somebody showed up outside the state house with one sign, but becomes a movement, and that it is a
Okay.
movement for change.
Okay. And I think you also told me too that, and we're going back to ADA. Sorry, world, if we're too focused on that, but I imagine the laws in many other countries are similar. That it doesn't cover nonprofits like churches.
So there are exemptions, and, like, for instance, I can't speak to the UN's, to the specific details of the UN Commission on People with Disabilities. But in regards to the ADA, um, there are very specifics given. Like, for instance, from an employment standpoint, a employer who has less than 15 employees is not going to have to comply with the ADA. But if you have, from an employment standpoint, but if you're providing uh, a product or a service to the public, that product or service still needs to be accessible. Um, Churches are exempt from complying with the ADA. Religious organizations are exempt. But that doesn't mean that it's not going to be beneficial to their operation to make certain that anybody who wants to worship within their church can get in through an accessible door, can get into the sanctuary, doesn't have to sit in the aisle, but can actually access the pews or the seating areas with their family and their friends. Those things all are going to enhance the future, of those operations, even if they aren't required to comply by the law.
Okay. All right, good. And again, human. I mean, churches are human rights organizations. I mean, you would think that, and I imagine that most of them do think about that. Well, how am I
They,
going to get this person with the wheelchair into my
yeah,
church?
it in the United States, religious organizations were among the first to fight against the ADA, and I believe again that's because of a fear of how much it was going to cost to take buildings that were built before anybody thought about automatic doors, curb cuts. Although I do want to point out that Thomas Jefferson's home had the first automatic doors in the United
Very
States.
cool. Oh, very cool.
Yeah. And so going all the way back to then, um, the accessibility is something that's about intent, and it happens when somebody puts intent to making certain that everybody can participate in what they're trying to provide. And that So yeah, even when you are exempt, even when you're a historic facility that was built before any of these codes were ever considered in building code or the U.S. standards of accessible design or any of that, um, that 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 you can still put intent into making certain that people are able to access that
Mhm.
to the maximum extent possible without having to destroy the historic significance of that building per se. Um, yeah.
Okay, we got about, let's see, 10, 15 minutes left here. Let me take a few minutes here to give a little plug to our organization, the
Yes.
Rotary Club of World Disability Advocacy. We've been around for about 5 years now, a little more than that. We have members in 40 different countries. Our goal, our focus is on the human rights and advocating for the human rights of people with disabilities. We welcome anybody who's interested in being a member of the club to write to us. And if I do the right thing here, I'll pull up the right. I think this is it.
Oh, look at that.
Rotary WDA at gmail.com. I want to make sure I had that right. So people can write to us here and express an interest in being part of us. We have 8 different areas of pillars that we're focusing on. So I'm sure there's something that we can get you involved in. So let's bring that back down again. Okay, so let's talk a bit about training. That's kind of your forte as you do go around to organizations and train them on an ADA, but also just on being disability friendly. Um,
Hmm.
and so what kind of training should be made for, say, like public officials, teachers, healthcare workers, to name a few, to ensure that they understand disability right laws?
I think one of the one of the first things, and you'd ask, why is it relevant, is getting people to think about that question. What do I understand about disability? What do I have questions about? Getting people to be open and engaged in that training process is important. Um, I think capturing that history with that is relevant, and like I said, everybody at some point is going to be impacted by some form of disability, whether it is their own or that of a loved one. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then getting them to understand that what that history is, what went into securing these rights is very
Mm-hmm.
important. Recognizing that some of these laws were implemented until years after they were put on the books, because it took the people actually advocating for that implementation, whether we're talking about sitting in a government building for a month, um, or we're talking about getting out of wheelchairs and climbing the steps of the United States Capitol building
Mhm.
to drive that point home. But and even getting folks to understand that in the United States, when we talk about the non-discrimination laws, recognizing that there were laws like the ugly laws in the United States that said that a person with a disability should not be seen in public.
Mhm.
The last of those was repealed in 1974 in Chicago.
Mm.
That's
Well,
not
that's not
that
far
long
away.
ago.
No, not far away at all.
Yeah.
No, shocking that we had
And
the code.
so understanding that, yeah, I think is the first step. And then the training, the awareness. Um, I find that it's very important to approach that in a way that is helping individuals identify with the topic, with
Hmm.
with the civil rights, and realizing that this is not just talking about somebody maybe that they saw in a restaurant or that they participated in a class with, but this is talking about them and their future ability to live as independently as they want to define their independence.
Okay, so I'm going to put the spotlight on you for a few minutes here. Not, it's not already on you, but I'm on your situation because you've said many times that you were a hotel manager and didn't even think about it. It wasn't until you had your accident that your whole thinking process changed. But it took an accident to change your thinking
Yes.
process. How are we going to change the thinking process of so many hotel managers in the world?
I
That
think
you,
it takes
that you were there because what would have happened back then if somebody came to you and say your hotel is not compliant? And no offense, but I mean, what you were in that state of mind that you weren't thinking about.
I mean, if somebody came to me in my lobby and told me that my hotel wasn't compliant, I would have grabbed a notebook and sat down with them and asked them to explain to me specifically
Good, good,
what those issues were.
good.
Um, because from a customer service standpoint, you don't ignore somebody's complaint, even if you don't feel like it's valid or you feel like it's petty. Um, I will say it was very hard for me after losing my legs to listen to somebody complain about their cheeseburger being made wrong
Mm,
or having been served after somebody who came into the restaurant behind them. Um, it or waiting 5 minutes to check into a room. Those those things I found when I went back to my hotel world, I could no longer listen to. But if somebody wanted to talk to me about struggling to get through the main doors of the hotel or struggling to get their luggage in because we were not accessible or not being able to get on the bed because the mattresses were designed too high,
mm,
um, which we run into all the time, um, or the risk that is presented by going into a accessible shower where the housekeeper has positioned the handheld shower head out of reach and it's 5 a.m. and you don't have anybody to call for help and you don't think to call the front desk, or you call the front desk and they don't understand what you're talking about, so they ignore it. You know, these are the things that people with disabilities run into, and then they have to question, okay, do I risk trying to reach for that thing that is not within reach and potentially injuring myself in the process because I can't get anybody to listen to me? um
okay.
so so that, like, it goes beyond everything and really down to human decency and how we treat each other and how
Okay.
we want to be treated.
Okay. That's good. That's a good answer. Regardless of what the situation is, each individual deserves
And
their, their needs met.
whether or not the law says that you have to have a certain a certain clearance coming through the threshold. That
Okay.
person's experience is important, and they need to feel seen when they speak up about whatever the obstacle was.
Okay. Um, and let's kind of finish off a little bit, and uh, um, putting the spotlight now on our organization, Rotary. What do you believe Rotary can do to help to play in monitoring, advocating this situation?
Well, so Rotary, really, when you think about it, Rotary extends way beyond just the club. It's the
Mm-hmm.
organizations that we as club members are involved in outside of that club.
Mm-hmm.
So the more that Rotary can educate club members about the lived experience of people with disabilities, about the value of having people with disabilities engaged in their clubs, and the uh, vital importance of making certain that every project a Rotary Club pursues meets standards of accessibility.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that we as an international club have the opportunity to say, okay, this country has these standards, this other country has these other standards. Which standards work best for the most people with disabilities? I think we have a tremendous opportunity to change the world through that.
Okay, good. And again, we're the Rotary Club of World Disability Advocacy. If you're welcome to be a part of this organization. I'm not going to screw things up here by trying to find my thing here, but just rotarywda@gmail.com. And Jeremy, I'd really, you and I have talked about this, like to have you back on a once a month basis and talk about different topics that are going on. And there are so many, particularly contemporary is the word, the current projects, current issues. And maybe next month, we because I'm living in Colombia at this moment, and I'm thinking about the earthquake and the people with
Yep.
disabilities that went through that. Maybe we can talk about the disasters and how a company, governments probably in particular, can better handle a disaster for people with disabilities. We may have you, or we could have another person on with you. We'll
Right.
see. We'll talk about that. But
And
that would be a good topic for next month.
and that's something that globally, like again, globally, Rotary can have a tremendous impact by making certain that people with disabilities stay in the forefront of whatever project we're encountering. And if there's a disaster and Rotary clubs are responding to that disaster, that those Rotary clubs are asking the question of how are people with disabilities being protected, supported in this process? Because as I know you and I've talked about before, even when the war in Ukraine began, there were people with disabilities who were not able to return to their homes because the infrastructure was no longer there.
Yeah, yeah, no, there's a lot of things we can talk about in that area. And again, it we can talk about it. Again, it comes
Yes.
down to, I think, educating the first responders, even the families, on how to deal with that situation. Okay, Mr. Jeremy, much appreciate this conversation. Hopefully, we've got some people thinking out of it, and we're going to continue to work on that a month, every so often. We'll come back and have monthly. We'll make it every so often. Monthly, we're coming back to have another conversation. Thank you, Jeremy.
Right. It is always a pleasure. Thank you.
All right, take care.
You too.